the murder of Sophie de Plantier happened when I was a young girl. I was 11 at the time. And I think anyone who lived in West Cork at the time, and I'm sure that's probably most of the people listening to this podcast, will remember just how shocking it was. I think when you grow up in an area like this, particularly in the 90s, where crime wasn't exactly something that people gave a great deal of thought to. I know at home, like, we never locked our doors, and my sister and I were given just enormous freedom. Just, we went out in the morning, and we kind of appeared when we were hungry to eat dinner, and then we were gone again, and no questions were asked. So I think that when that happened, it was so shocking because it felt as if the darkness from the outside world was sort of encroaching upon ours.
Hello and welcome to the Southern Star's Coronavirus podcast. I'm the news editor, Siobhan Cronin, and this week's interview is with Clonakilty native and award-winning writer Louise O'Neill, whose new book is just out. I spoke to her earlier about her decision to base herself in West Cork, the plot of the new novel, which is about a murder on a fictional West Cork island, and how she has been spending her time in Clonakilty during the worst days of COVID. So, Louise, let's get straight into the new book, After the Silence, which is behind me here. And I'm almost finished it. I was reading it all last night. I got it yesterday. I would have got it sooner, but I was waiting on the postman, so you can blame on post. But I'm loving it at the minute. But just maybe to tell the listener what it's about and the plot for this one, which is a little bit different from earlier books, I think.
Yeah. Well, After the Silence is set on a small island called Inishrune, which is off the coast of Cork. And this very glamorous, wealthy family, the Kinsellas, have set up a world-renowned artist retreat centre there. And the youngest Kinsella son, who's called Henry, has married a local woman called Keelan. And it's at her birthday party that this very wild birthday party, that this violent storm engulfs the island, completely cutting it off from the mainland, and the power goes out, and it's all a bit of a catastrophe. And then the next morning, the body of a woman is found, and no one can get on the island and no one can get off the island. So it has to have been someone here who did it. And then 10 years later, the murder of the beautiful Nessa Crowley still haunts the Irish people. And then a team of documentary makers come to Inishrune determined to figure out exactly what happened that night.
Great. And would it be fair to say that some real life events, or even some details maybe from real life events, sneak their way into the storyline there? Because even the two documentary makers, we had, of course, the West Cork podcast, which was very popular here last year, the year before, two documentary makers coming to Ireland on foot of having heard the story from a relation. I was just wondering if that, maybe we know a little bit more about the background to that one.
Yeah, of course. And obviously, I have to say, and I think anyone who has read the book would understand that the two cases themselves are very different. But, obviously the murder of Sophie de Plantier happened when I was a young girl. I was 11 at the time. And I think anyone who lived in West Cork at the time, and I'm sure that's probably most of the people listening to this podcast, will remember just how shocking it was. I think when you grow up in an area like this, particularly in the 90s, where crime wasn't exactly something that people gave a great deal of thought to. I know at home, like, we never locked our doors, and my sister and I were given just enormous freedom. Just, we went out in the morning, and we kind of appeared when we were hungry to eat dinner, and then we were gone again, and no questions were asked. So I think that when that happened, it was so shocking because it felt as if the darkness from the outside world was sort of encroaching upon ours. And in a lot of ways, and I think it ties in with, I suppose, the beginning of the Celtic Tiger. A lot of ways, I think that murder almost heralded the end of one era, like the end of,
Innocence,
the old Ireland. And yeah, exactly. And obviously I was a child, and I'm sure there were a lot of people, at the time maybe who would disagree with me, but I suppose that was the way that I saw it. So I think that when I heard news about the West Cork podcast, I was just so fascinated. And, I haven't been someone, I've traditionally been a little bit squeamish about true crime documentaries, because I think so often there's a lot of attention paid to the murderer or the person who is suspected, or whatever, rather than the victim themselves. In a lot of, let's say, particularly American ones, I've noticed that. So, but I was bet into that into the Audible series. Like, I listened to all 13 episodes in less than 24 hours. And I think there was a very small part of me, which I'd say was probably the 11-year-old girl, who really hoped that by the end of it, that these two documentary makers would have solved this crime, and they would have, I think, I don't know, given Sophie and her family peace. But in a way, actually, I suppose the people of West Cork peace as well, because I think this has cast such a long shadow. And obviously, real life isn't tied up quite as neatly as it is in fiction. But I think when I finished it, I was very surprised actually by how, like, there was a lot of things that I didn't know about a case that I thought I knew everything about. And I think I had very, by the end of it, I was like, I really don't know what happened here. I really don't know who did this. And I think that sometimes growing up in this area, maybe we were told, a certain story, and it was all so uncertain by the end of it. But I think afterwards, it wasn't necessarily this particular case that I kept thinking about. It was more the idea of, I suppose, the idea of outsiders, the idea of the blow-in, the Sassenach, and I suppose as well, the thought of these two documentary makers coming into a very small, tightly knit community, with their English accents, and asking questions, and I think especially, I suppose, poking at a wound that had barely covered over. And to me, I think I could not stop thinking about it, and that, I suppose, was where the seed began.
But I suppose it does touch on other themes as well. And what I particularly like about it too is the little interspersing of little words of Irish, because it's set on an island that is Irish speaking, and the occupants get the ferry from Baltimore. So I'm just wondering, is it Cape Clear? There's an Irish college there.
I mean, it was funny. When I was doing research, like, I spoke to someone from Aranmore, I spoke to someone from Inishir, I spoke to someone from Inishmore, I spoke to two people from Cape Clear. And I picked sort of traditions and sayings from each of those to kind of make this fictional island. But for me, physically, just because I'm kind of lazy, and that I just physically, like, Cape Clear is the clearest of all of those islands to me, because that's the one that I know the best, that I've been going to Cape Clear since I was a child. And so I suppose physically it's more similar to Cape Clear, but I'm very reluctant to sort of say that, because obviously it's not, it's completely fictional. But
obviously not,
just
the
idea of getting the boat from Baltimore. Yeah.
And were you one of the Irish College lassies on Cape Clear?
Do you know what's terrible is that I never went to Irish College. I feel like I have been deprived of like this wonderful experience. Yeah, I don't know. Friends of mine went to Ballyverney one year, and my aunt-in-law grew up in Ballyfershire. She would have spoken Irish at home, and I had good enough Irish in school. And it was funny when I was writing the book, because, as you said, there's Irish going through it. And a very good friend of mine, Trelach O'Bukala, helped me. I would text him and say, how do you say this? Or is this how you would say this? And then he proofread it afterwards for me. But I've actually signed up for Irish speaking classes with Gael Culture, which is starting at the end of this month, because it actually really brought home to me how poor my own Irish is now. And also, I think it's such a beautiful language, and he would come back and he would say, this is how you say this, and there's no real direct translation. And I just thought, God, it's like a secret language. And I suppose I would love to have, like, as I keep saying, I'd love to have like a 5-year-old child's like level of Irish. That's all I want.
Absolutely. I think we all seem to come back to it as adults for some reason, and it never quite stuck with us as children.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. So can I just ask you a little bit about the themes of your books? As you see behind me, I'm a fan. I have all the novels,
Yeah.
but I have found that the themes are quite dark. Now, I was thinking about it last night, and I was thinking, what I love about your books is that you kind of draw us in very gently. You think you're reading a lovely light read because you're not a fan of big convoluted words or really overly colorful descriptive passages. And then you get to the end of the book, or even in the middle, you go, my God, this is a really heavy theme. Like, you have domestic violence in the current book, you've got murder, you've written about rape, you've written about obsession, misogyny. What is it, do you think, in your own psyche that draws you to these very dark themes, or is it just they're really good themes to write about?
I don't know. It's funny. A friend of mine who is an English author, she sent me a message the other day saying that she had finished After the Silence, and she said, I'm trying to remember now, but basically something like what I marvel at is, or what she said, like she said that she marveled at that how I'm very warm and sunny every time she meets me. And then she said that, but then when I read your books, they're always just very dark, and she said it's just really interesting to see how easy it seems to be for you to kind of access that. And like, I mean, I never want my books to be issues novels. I never want them to be preachy. I always want them to be complex and nuanced and complicated. And I think particularly in After the Silence, which is primarily like a psychological thriller, like I wanted to make it a page turner. I wanted to make it gripping. But because it's me, I suppose I am always thinking about other topics or other themes that I've written in so many different genres. Like, I've written a dystopian novel, I've written contemporary novels, I've written a fantasy retelling of The Little Mermaid. This is a psychological thriller, but I think there's a theme or a thread that kind of connects all of the books. And I suppose most authors anyway have, I think, just certain motifs that they keep returning to, because I think you're trying to almost work it out in life and in fiction. And for me, I suppose, I am a woman living in a world that sometimes feels like it's maybe not designed for me. And I, I suppose I've experienced sexual trauma. I've struggled with an eating disorder, and I suppose I know what it's like to navigate this world in a female body. And these are topics that, if you look at something like domestic violence, like we talk about coronavirus being a pandemic. I mean, domestic violence is a pandemic. Like, it impacts 1 billion people around the world. 1 in 3 women will experience some kind of abuse in their lifetime. And sometimes it can feel very frustrating when that is marginalized as a niche topic, or a woman's issue, because, as I said, it's so prevalent. And I suppose what I found interesting, because the original idea for this book was the murder mystery and was the documentary, but the more research that I did into these kinds of cases, what I found really striking was that so often, if there was a prime suspect in a case, and if he was a man and if he was straight, a lot of times people would say things like, well, why does his wife stay, and why does his girlfriend stay? And to me, it was a really interesting echoing of that very problematic language that we hear concerning victims of domestic abuse. Like, God, why don't these women just leave? And it's just, I suppose, once I started to think about those parallels, and also, I suppose, so often in psychological thrillers, you have an unreliable narrator, or you have someone who's not quite, has a tenuous grasp on reality, maybe, or believes they have a tenuous grasp on reality. And for victims who are being emotionally abused, or who are victims to gaslighting, like, it's quite a similar experience, in that you also believe that you have a tenuous grasp on reality, or you're losing your grasp on reality. So to me, they felt like really, I don't know, like, that they just fit together. And I think, I haven't traditionally read a lot of psychological thrillers, but over the last few years, I have been more drawn to them. And I think it's because, like, I think the bad writers in this genre will use women's bodies, or violence against women, as a narrative device. And I think that the good writers will explore how women, I think, so often are conditioned to live in fear of violence. And you know, if you look at someone like a Leanne Moriarty, you know, who explored domestic violence with Big Little Lies, or Megan Abbott, you know, is incredible. Dorothy Coomson, Tana French, you know, Erin Kelly with He Says, She Says, looked at rape culture. Like, it's actually kind of interesting, I think, how those two, like how this genre seems to tie in quite neatly with the exploration of quite dark themes, particularly pertaining to women and women's bodies.
And when you sit down to write the books, Louise, do you have them very well plotted out in advance, or is it a case that when, say the protagonist in the current book, do you kind of find that they kind of draw themselves as you start writing, and that they start to go in directions without you being conscious of it? Or is their whole personality mapped out in advance by you?
It depends. I mean, like with this book, I did a lot more research than I ordinarily would. You know, I spent 6 months researching it because I think there was so many elements to it. You know, there was the domestic violence strand, which I obviously wanted to speak to survivors about that. There was also like life on an island, you know, what's that like? And then also, I suppose, just the actual mechanics of a case like this, you know, having to talk to the guards, having to talk to, you know, the former state pathologist of Ireland, to try and make sure that everything that I was saying made sense, was plausible, and this is kind of how it would happen. So there was an enormous amount of research done in it. And I think for me, ordinarily, like the characters would really come first. So I would really need to feel like I understood Keelan, I understood Henry, I understood their psychology and why they behave the way that they do. So for me, I think before I start, I want to have a very clear grounding in who these people are, because to be honest, voice is so important, and that sense of like, that can really, I think, propel the book. But I did with this one have a very, very clear outline. There were certain things like halfway through, I had been struggling with how to tell the documentary style. And then it was so funny, I watched this television program, well, it's Netflix, and it was very, very trashy. It was a Spanish, it was called Elite. It's about this Spanish teenagers having sex and there's a murder, and they sort of they built it around that, where that the police officer is investigating each one of the students. And I thought, oh, this is good. Like, so, and then so midway through, I knew that I was going to have the actual documentary woven through the narrative, so that we could hear from all the different voices, you know, whether that was the Islanders, or whether it was a guard, or whether it was Nessa's cousin, or Nessa, or, you know, the murder victim, her mother or her cousin, or, you know, Keelan's son. I think just to kind of give a very broad picture of it, but also, I suppose, to understand that memory is very fallible, and everyone's version of what happened that night is slightly different. So I think for the reader, you're never quite sure what to believe or who to trust. So I think, and you know, that adds, I suppose, another dimension of interest when you're dealing with a psychological thriller.
So just let's, for a moment, I just, would it be fair to say that Asking for It has been the most successful book to date, only that it's grown legs into other genres, as in it's been on the stage and there's been work done on a movie of it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, I was just going to ask you maybe to expand on that. How you found when your little baby, we'll say, of a book is kind of taken on board by other people in other media. How you feel about that, and like, would you be happy to see some of the other books go down that road, or are you just happy with
well, except for Almost Love, I mean, the movie of Only Ever Yours, which has been in production the longest, I think is probably the furthest along. Asking for the stage adaptation was incredible. I was going to say, The Surface Breaks, the animation rights have been bought, and with After the Silence, I can't really say anything yet, but I think we'll have good news on that soon. Yeah, I think it would be like, it's quite fit, like I think it would make a good TV show. But yes, I would say After the Silence is definitely, I suppose, the one that has left its mark, maybe. And the thing is, as a writer, is that you never know, like you never, like if I was looking at the books, do I think After the Silence is the best one or my favorite one? Like, not necessarily. But I think sometimes a book comes at the right time, it hits the zeitgeist, people are ready to read it, and then a lot of it is word of mouth. And the thing about that is that you just cannot control that. There's so much that like your publisher can do with marketing and with publicity and all of that. But I think a book is only ever going to take off, or sort of, I think, be embraced by the culture in that way, if it's people telling each other, you need to read this book, you have to read this book, have you read this, asking for it or whatever. And it was a very strange experience. I mean, it was wonderful. It was very humbling. I think, as a writer, to have something that you've created go out into the world and for people to respond to it and to feel like it has done some good, or that it has helped people in some way, I think is really beyond anything that you could have ever wanted or hoped for. So I'm very proud of that. And I think in a way it's the only book where I felt like I had to detach myself from it in a way, where that, the other books really feel like mine, I feel like they belong to me. Whereas I think with Asking for It very early on, I knew that it didn't really belong to me anymore, that it had been taken by other people in a good way, and sort of that they had taken it to their hearts. And then obviously when the stage adaptation, I was like, this is a new iteration of this. And I think in a way it's healthy, to, once you've written something, just to let it go. And Elizabeth Gilbert, I think, calls it kicking it to the curb. You put so much work into the book, and then it comes out and you have to do the publicity and you have to do the promotion. And then you can't just stay attached to it, because you can't become more attached to the outcome or the inevitable success or failure. You can't become more attached to that than the work itself. So right now, I have sort of marked out September for this, and then really it'll just be, okay, back to work, back to the desk, because that's the reason why I do any of this.
And you had quite, though, an input, I think, creatively. Well, as in, I know you were at the rehearsals, you were involved with the cast, you had quite a good relationship, I think, with the whole production team on Asking for It. And is that the same with is it Only Ever Yours that's in production as well?
Yeah. It's interesting, because Only Ever Yours, they asked me would I write the script, but I just was like, I don't know how to do this. So they have someone really amazing working on it. And it's been lovely. It's actually been very interesting, because it's so, like, that book came out in 2014, so it's 6 years ago now. And realistically, like, I probably haven't read it in 7 years, because once they're out, I never read them, because I just see the things I want to change and the mistakes I made, and I'm like, oh, I wouldn't have made that creative decision. So a new script actually just arrived last week, and then we have a phone call, and because they want to hear. But I've actually said to her, like, I keep saying, I'm like, this is your baby now. Like, it's 7 years on, 8 years on since I wrote it. It's time for, I think, a fresh retelling of this story. And I just think sometimes you see with authors that they can get very precious about their work, and I think I try and be collaborative, and I try and be sort of open to that exchange of ideas, because, like, the book exists the way it is. Like, I wrote it, I had control over that, I put it out into the world, and I think if there's going to be other interpretations of that, I think the best way to go into that is sort of with an open mind. And
you're not very nervous, Louise. Would you not be extremely nervous of how it might come out, and then your name is still attached to it? And
no, honestly, and I know maybe I'll feel differently if it comes out. I mean, I love the script. It's different to the book, but I love the script. Maybe I would feel, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure maybe it will be disappointing. I don't think I would feel nervous about it, because, again, the thing is that, like, as I said, it will never change the book. Like, the book is the book. I wrote the book. And if a film or a TV or a play, they're entirely different creatures. And I think that I have to, I suppose, as an artist, I think you respect other artists' creative process, and I don't want to be too, I don't know, I don't want to be too precious about it. I just sort of think,
it's very, very
let's see what happens.
magnanimous of you altogether.
Yeah.
Or else
I say
you're
that
just
now.
very trusting
on,
maybe of other people. Can you talk a little bit about the fact that you are in Clonakilty? I know you were in New York for a while, you came back, you were in Dublin for a while, I think, and now you've kind of made that decision. You're building a house, I think, in Clon, that you want to work there and live there, which is
Yeah, I
fantastic.
mean, yeah, I love it here. Of course, my partner lives in Dublin, and so that's a little bit challenging. And I think that, up until this point, it was very easy doing long distance, because we would just go up and down every second weekend, and it was fine because we were both we're both very passionate about what we do. So it felt like, actually, in a way, that it was helpful to have the weeks to kind of really focus on our work and then sort of really be together at the weekends. But obviously, because of lockdown, we didn't see each other for 4 months, which was really, really, really challenging. And to the point where I wasn't sure if we were going to make it, and I think it's now that we've sort of reconnected, and I think it's made me realize just how precious that is and how it has to be protected, and minded, I suppose, a bit. So his job is obviously, he's a journalist, and so his job is very Dublin centric. And I don't know. I mean, I don't really want to move to Dublin, but like I am, a laptop and as in I could work anywhere. And so I have, done some building work here, just renovated a little farmhouse like right next door to my parents. And which seemed to me like a good compromise. I said, okay, I don't need to take out a mortgage. Like I can just do this little project, have my own space, my own little bolt hole, and then we can kind of decide what comes next. But I will be very, very slow to leave West Cork. I mean, I love it here. Like there's something, I think, if you grow up in the country and if you grow up by the sea, I think there's a part of you that always kind of needs it, like you crave it a bit. And if I spend too much time in the city now, I'm like, oh God, I need to get to Inchdanny, or I just need to go for a swim, or I just need to do something like that. I don't know, the wildness of this area, this kind of stark natural beauty. It's really inspiring. And I think for me, because I'm someone who can tend to get anxious, and I can tend to kind of live very much in my head, actually being somewhere where I can turn off my phone and go outside and just think none of that matters. None of that is real. This is the only thing that is real right here, what I can see, my feet on the ground. And to me, there's something very, I don't know, it feels very grounding, and it feels very healing, even though I know that sounds very, a bit pretentious, but that's how I feel.
Well, I mean, I think that, the sea has been a remedy for lots of people for mental health issues. Their therapists would tell them, go to the water, and, it does help.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't think it's a bit twee or cliched or anything.
Yeah.
But also, you're also very close physically and emotionally to your family. And that's always come through. I mean, anytime I've interviewed you, you've mentioned, your dad in particular, his influence. You've talked about your mum's support, and then also your grandmother who passed away in the last year or so, I think, was it, Louise?
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you find it difficult being that close to home and not having her around?
Oh God, as soon as you said that, I thought I was going to start crying. So yes, I do find it, and it'll be 2 years in January now. I think it's very strange. Like, it's funny, my cousins, my uncle who inherited the farm, his two daughters, sometimes, on Instagram, because they would have lived quite very close. Like, my grandmother, the farmhouse was by the farm, and then they built a house kind of just at the end of the lane. So sometimes they will share photos on Instagram, just of the view, or if they're inside in my grandmother's house, or and every time I see it, I feel very lonely, because I think it's it's sorry, it's even, I think, seeing her chair and just thinking, oh God, you know, that she'll never be in that chair again, or, you know, so it just felt like such a huge loss. And I think it's, you know, for me, it was very interesting because I was 33 when she died, and, you know, like I wasn't, and she was 85, so it wasn't um, that she was young or that I was young, but the only way I can describe it is like it felt like my childhood was over. And at 33, I was like, well, obviously my childhood is long over. Like that's not something I was kind of holding on to, but I think it was this real realization of everything about it. You know, like that house and her face and her bake. You know, it was just everything. I was like, oh, I'll never see her again. I'll never have her brown bread again. I'll never go over home and walk in and see her sitting in her chair again. And it felt just unbelievably devastating. And I think it was interesting because I suppose sometimes when a grandparent dies, you know, you're not really afforded the same sort of time or space maybe to grieve it. You know, people are very much like, you know, this isn't a tragedy. And the thing is that like I know it's not a tragedy. Like when I was 14, my uncle who was 30 died, so like I understand like what a tragedy looks like. And you know, it wasn't that I was confusing that, but I think it still just felt like this, I suppose, just the end of something, and just trying to grieve that and move on, and I suppose just come to terms with how much she had meant to me. And I suppose that sense of there being someone in your life, you know, who just completely loves you unconditionally and accepts you absolutely as you are, which is quite rare actually. And you know, she was always that presence in my life. And you know, I mean, you know, since the moment I kind of understood what death was, I was afraid of her dying. And like I remember when I was a child, like I must have been like 5 or 6 maybe, asking her, you know, I was like, I don't want you to die, you know. And I mean, which is so funny looking back because she must have been like in her late 50s going, okay, I'm not that old, you know. And she bent down and she said, you know, like everyone has to die and the Lord calls us home in his time, but she said it won't be for a very long time yet, you know. And I suppose, you know, she was right. But yeah, so it's just been, you know, it's just a process, it's part of life. But I do, and I think, you know, I've spoken about her a lot during this promotional period, and obviously the book After the Silence is dedicated to her. And you know, she would have pretended to be so embarrassed by all of it, but secretly really enjoy it. You know, that kind of real Irish woman thing of being like, oh no, God, I'm mortified, but like absolutely like relishing all of it at the same time.
And like, are you conscious when you're writing, or like when she was alive, were you conscious that, oh, Granny will be reading this, and now that she's passed, you're conscious she's on your shoulder, you know, reading some of your sex scenes? Or I mean,
honestly, no. And you know, it was funny because like she read I mean, the Examiner column was probably more what I was worried about, because I don't actually think she ever read the books. Like she bought the books and she would have bought them for friends, and she went to a daycare center every Tuesday, and there was a man who used to come and pick her up, so she would have bought the books and gotten them signed for his children, for his daughters who were in their 20s. And so she was very proud of it, but I don't necessarily think she would have read them. I mean, she never said it to me, but like she would have read the column every week. And you know, I do remember one piece that I wrote about having sex on the first date, and I did text my aunt-in-law, and I was like, look, Colette, can you just make sure, like, if you're dropping the paper over to Granny, like, just tear that page out.
Warner.
I think I'd be more embarrassed than she was, but like I will say, you know, she never once said to me, you know, particularly now coming up to the repeal referendum, and you know, I would have written extensively about abortion. I would have written extensively about the Catholic Church. And like two of my granduncles, like one of whom's dead now, but the other one is like another grandparent to me. I absolutely adore him. We're priests, and like I visit Father Con. He is in a retirement home now in Dalgan. So I visit him regularly, and I write to him, and you know, he would have read my column, and they were very accepting of it. Like there was no, and I mean, this is like a man who, like, he lived in Korea, like he moved to Korea like in the 50s, like after the Korean like war, and like the place Seoul was like a shell, and like there was never once a I'm disgusted by you, or you should never have written that. It was very much like, okay, this is your opinion, and that's fine. You know, it was, and like my grandmother, I remember a friend of hers once saying to her, my mother told me this, because obviously she would never praise me to my face, like that would have been, now in case I would have gotten notions, Siobhan, like that would have just been beyond her.
Don't get
But
notions.
yeah, exactly. But she said, my mother said that this woman came up to her, and she said something like, "Oh, you know, it was a disgrace what Louise wrote in her last column. I think you obviously have been criticizing the church, and the sex scandals, and the cover of sexual abuse." And I suppose using that as a way of talking about repeal, and the referendum. And my mother said that my grandmother bristled and sort of stood up to, she was quite short, you know, and sort of stood up to her full height, and said, well, you know, the only thing that Louise ever wants to do is help people, and sort of like, you know, like sped off, you know, very insulted. And I think it was that she was very quiet in like her support and in her love, and everything about her was kind of very understated, but also you would never doubt it either. You know, you knew, like, it was just, as I said, this kind of unconditional love. But
She
I really appreciate
she kept all the clippings, Louise, didn't she, of
that.
everything you ever wrote?
Yeah. When we were cleaning out her house afterwards, we found this drawer, and it was full of all my columns, every interview that I'd ever given, every feature, every review, like everything. And I had no idea that she was keeping any of this, but she had it all kept in this drawer. And it was just, and I think, you know, I was really lucky actually, because, you know, so many people would have asked me, you know, do your parents get, I suppose, a bit strange, or do they try and, you know, tell you to stay quiet or not to talk about that subject, or, you know, I suppose to censor you in a way. And I was like, no, they've never once ever said to me, you shouldn't write about that, or you should, you know, that's not, they would always have said, you know, this is your story, or this is your life, and, you know, you must do what you feel is right. But I was extraordinarily lucky that my grandmother never said, I'm disappointed in you, or I'm horrified by this, or, you know, she really just, but, you know, it was the same way when I was a child. Like, we used to go visiting to her brothers and sisters, and I would get up on the table and I would do these dances, and I'd say they just thought I was insane. And there was never get down off the table, there was never be quiet, you know, or you're embarrassing me, or it was just sort of, that's Louise. She is who she is. That's fine. And honestly, it's such a gift to have been given as a child, but also just as a person. I just think it's an incredible gift to give someone in a sense of, I love you just the way you are.
Unconditional love, basically.
Yeah.
Can we just touch for 1 minute on your time in New York? Because you said to me before that you were working in the fashion industry there, and you really found it quite difficult, and it struck me as you felt it was quite shallow. And I've always been surprised. I'm always waiting for the next book to be about the fashion industry, and I don't think that's coming yet. But can you tell me a little bit about it then? And because for most girls of your age, that would have been a dream job, and, you know, God,
Yeah.
working in New York and fashion, but you didn't like it at all, really.
I mean, I don't know if I would say shallow, because, you know, a lot of my friends still work in the industry, and like I love, like, when a friend of mine who's a fashion editor, and she just did this incredible cover, because she's a fashion editor of Garage, or Garage as they would say, and they did one with Michaela Cole, you know, the creator of I Will Not, I May Destroy You. And it was honestly like looking at art. Like, the clothes were incredible, the styling was amazing. So I think I still have such an appreciation of the level of artistry that goes, you know, from the hair to the makeup to the fashion stylist to the designers to the fashion editor that goes into creating something like that. So it's not that I thought it was shallow. I think it was more, There were a few elements to it. I think firstly, it was way too high pressured for me. And I think I realized pretty early on, you know, I was coupled with a city like New York, which is very fast paced, which is kind of driven on ambition and drive and sort of like just this relentless kind of frenetic energy. And then to be, I suppose, in an industry or to be in an office where everyone was very respectful, like it wasn't like, you know, the devil wears Prada, but it wasn't quite a high pressurized job. And, you know, it was very long hours, and
What
there
was your
was
role,
very little
Louise?
room. Pardon?
What was your role in there?
Oh, sorry. I was working as an assistant, like I was interning as an assistant to the senior style director. So it's a lot of sort of like dealing with samples and it's kind of hard to, like, I'm trying to, like, you know, all the clothes that come in, like every single piece that comes in has to be photographed, and then you send it to a shoot, and then when it comes back from the shoot, and it can be covered in, I mean, in those days things are different now because budgets are smaller, but let's say if it had been sent to Miami and it would come back and it's all sand, and you're like, okay, look 31 from Dolce & Gabbana, earrings, hat, dress, shoes, bracelet, and then you're like, oh shit, we've only got one earring, and then you've got to find the earring, because if you don't find the earring, like the
Worth a
PR
fortune.
Dolce is going to go crazy. And so it just, like, it was quite, like, I suppose in a way, like the attention to detail that was required, and the level of focus and the level of sort of nearly obsessiveness, you know, just didn't suit me. And I think as well, I just constantly felt like I was going to have a heart attack, and I really didn't want to have a heart attack over losing a pair of Dolce & Gabbana earrings in Miami. You know, I was like, I don't want this to be the way that I go. And I suppose because I had suffered, you know, with an eating disorder for most of my adult life, and I had a relapse while I was working there. And I think there was two, again, I think it was a way of relieving stress because I was in this job that I found enormously stressful. It was also a way, I think, of numbing out because I was in a job that I felt like I wasn't good at. And for me, like, to feel like I wasn't good at something meant that I wasn't good enough as a human being. Like, so I really internalized all of that. And then I think thirdly, you're also in an industry which does fetishize thinness and beauty. And there was, you know, a lot of talk about food and weight and diets in the office, which, to be fair, is not unique to offices that are run by fashion magazines. You know, I think that's quite a common experience. So I think all of those things together felt like this perfect storm where, you know, I just started to restrict my food and to lose weight. So I think that when I started working with a therapist in New York, who was amazing, she was very, I think she was really pushing me to sort of look at like how society and how, like, living in a world that teaches women that their weight and their physical attractiveness, you know, correlates to their worth as a human being. I think the impact that that had had on me emotionally and mentally, and how that had manifested itself as an eating disorder, it sort of became impossible for me to feel comfortable, I suppose, to continue working in an industry that I felt like maybe perpetuated that. But I suppose it's too simplistic to sort of say, oh, the fashion industry is responsible for anorexia or, you know, anything like that, because I think it's such a complex issue. And my therapist always says that, like, your genes kind of put the bullets in, and then the environment pulls the trigger. So it's sort of a mixture of both, you know.
And now that you've come back to West Cork, do you feel very safe? Do you feel like safe from anorexia? You know, safe from, you know, the horrors that you have gone through, you know, as a younger woman?
Well, I mean,
Feel
you know,
protected?
I'm 35 now, and I had my, I'm trying to think, it was 3-year anniversary sort of recovery, because I mean, I think when I came, there would have been periods of time, like I did very well with, like, for about 6 months when I was in New York, actually, because of this incredible therapist that I was seeing. And I remember when I was going home, she said, we need to make sure now that you're seeing someone, you know, when you get back. And then I kind of, I don't know, I suppose I didn't really find anyone that I connected with, and there was someone in Cork that seemed really good, but I thought, oh, that's too far to travel. And I think I got a bit complacent, and I thought, oh, I'll be fine, you know, it'll be fine. Whereas really 6 months is very early on in recovery. So I relapsed, and then I sort of was back and forth where I might have periods of like 5 months where I'd be fine, and then, maybe I'd have a small relapse, and then I'd kind of get back on the wagon. And then I think that when Asking for It came out, it was such an overwhelming experience. And I think you do become like, I'm just after a promo cycle with After the Silence, and like I would have had to have made an appointment with my therapist going, I'm feeling very conscious of my body right now because of getting my photo taken, or because of going on television, or all of those things that sort of bring that home a bit. So it was very bad in 2016. Like, I always say that it was the best year of my life professionally, and it was just a nightmare on a personal level. And I was living here, I was living at home, and I'm just like really, really, really bad. And my parents were really trying to help me, but I just couldn't seem to kind of, I don't know, I just couldn't seem to pull myself out of it. And then I think I was writing 2 books in 2017. I was writing Almost Love, and I was writing After the Silence. And I started to think about, okay, these books are going to be released within 2 months of each other in 2018. And I thought, if I'm not in recovery, I won't survive it. Like, I think it was a genuine, and people think that seems a bit dramatic, but when you're putting your body under that much pressure, like, and you're not feeding it, and like, it's just like, I kept having this kind of recurring thought where I'm going to have a heart attack, and my heart is going to give out, because that had been something when I was 21, and when I had been admitted to John and God with anorexia, that they were very concerned about my heart. So I kept thinking, I was like, it's just not going to be able to withstand this. So I started going to the eating disorder centre in Cork, which I think is imperative. And now when people come to me and they ask me for help, I'm like, you can't just go to a normal therapist. You have, as brilliant as they are, like, you have to go to someone who is a specialist in this, because it would be like having cancer and going and expecting your GP to treat you. Like, you need an expert, you need someone who's a specialist in this. So like, I worked very closely with them, and it was like, you talk about sometimes like something being an overnight success, or something being an overnight, like, that it just all comes together. But I think it had been years of like therapy and years of trying to work with this, and suddenly I think I just was ready to kind of let it go. And I have been in full recovery now for 3 years, and I think this is the first time in my life where this feels normal. Because I think that when you have something like this, like, I was around 14 and a half, kind of 15, when I first developed an eating disorder, and it was a part of my life until I was 33. So for the majority of my adult life, I haven't known what it's like to eat normally. I didn't know what it was like to feel full. I didn't know what it was like really even to feel hungry. Like, I just didn't have any sort of awareness of what that meant, like what it meant to have a normal relationship with food. And now, like, I suppose the freedom that comes with just eating when I'm hungry and stopping when I'm full, being like, oh, I feel like some chocolate today, and having some and then just not thinking about it, is honestly, I cannot explain. It feels like 2 entirely different people. Like, sometimes when I think about the person that I was in 10 years ago, or 2012, 2013, 2016, it's like you're talking about a distant cousin or something, someone that I know but not very well. And I think it's the freedom, that's what I think people who maybe are going through it can't even begin to understand. Because, and anyone who's had an addiction will, I think, or recovered from it, understands that, because you devote so much time to the addiction, you devote so much time and energy, and the secrecy and all of that I think goes into maintaining this pretense that everything is okay, that when you let go of that, all of a sudden you look around and you're like, my God, I have so much time, I don't even know what to do with any of this. And I think the reason, people sometimes ask, like, why do I talk about this, or why do I want to be so open about it? And I think, firstly, I suppose the culture of shame that surrounds eating disorders is very, it's very harmful, and I think it actually perpetuates the eating disorder itself, because you feel you engage in the behaviors and then you feel shame about engaging in the behaviors, and then in order to numb out from that shame you engage in the behaviors. So it's like this really vicious cycle that just goes on and on and on. So I think that like eliminating the shame and the secrecy and talking openly about it is important. And also from this perspective, I think I'm evangelical about saying to people, full recovery is possible. Because I think I had just kind of accepted that this was always going to be a part of my life. I would probably manage it, that maybe I'd be 80% recovered, or that I would restrict maybe only in times of stress, or whatever. So I think to look at it from this vantage point and to be able to say to people, if I can recover after 17 years of like a very intensive eating disorder, anyone can do this.
That's lovely, a positive note. And I'm always reluctant to go to places like that with people, even when they say they will talk about it, because most people aren't as open and honest as you. And I think it's fantastic. There must be so many people out there suffering, and they don't hear many people talking about anorexia. So, well done on that. You also went off social media for a while, Louise, and I often wondered, was that part? Because social media can be such a nasty, horrible place. Do you think that had any part in your recovery, just getting away from it for a while?
Yeah, I would agree. I suppose, to be honest, I think part of the recovery was just taking care of myself, like being like, I'm an adult, learning to cook for myself, learning to like not push myself if I was tired, like going to bed. Like this sounds so basic to most adults, but I think when you have had an addiction or an illness like this from a young age, it kind of stunts you emotionally. So you almost feel like in your, when you recover, that you're trying to figure out how to like actually function as an adult in the world. And I think a lot of it was just setting boundaries for myself and saying, I don't need to do this, I don't need to be these, a punching bag for these people. And I came off Twitter and Instagram for 18 months, and I've been off Twitter nearly 2 years. But my partner actually is in charge of my Twitter account now, just for promo purposes. So that's lovely. So I don't have to deal with it. I don't have to think about it. He just tweets from my account. Although one day there last week, he forgot to switch accounts and he started tweeting about the Bohemians, which are his favorite soccer team, and I was like, okay, very off brand here, please keep to the subject.
Yeah, people might spot that one, I think.
Yeah, but I think the thing is with social media is that, again, I suppose it's too simplistic to say it's either all bad or it's all good, because I think that for a lot of people, like, we wouldn't have had the Me Too movement without social media. Like Black Lives Matter, that has been propelled through social media. And those are just two such incredibly important movements. So, and I think that, I suppose it has created, the funny thing about it is that it actually allows people to be very empathetic, but it also sort of seems to weaponize cruelty as well. Like I had this DM this morning on Instagram, which I was quite surprised by, because Instagram is normally a very safe space. And it was, just basically, fuck you, you fucking feminist. I wish you would kill yourself, you ugly conscious. And I was just like, and then it was really strange, because I looked on his account, because I always do this just to see if anyone I know follows him, or whatever.
How many followers they have is usually a good clue as well.
Yeah, exactly. But what was really interesting about this was it wasn't anonymous, it was his own account, and the first person that he followed was PA the House. I just thought, like, after telling me to kill myself on World Suicide Prevention Day, and then you look and you see that someone is following PA the House, it's very strange. And I think I really noticed that with the Caroline Flack situation, because it was just so sad when she died. And I remember I wrote a piece about it for my column in the Examiner, and I was looking. I'm not, as I said, I'm not on Twitter, but sometimes I'll search for things to see sort of how people are responding to it. So I did that with Caroline Flack, and I thought it was really interesting the amount of people who were, first of all, like, blaming the media, saying the media were a disgrace, that they had caused this. And then they were saying, like hashtag be kind. And I started looking back through some of these people through their older tweets, and like this really vicious commentary about Meghan Markle, implying that she was, whatever, I'm not going to repeat any of it, and like quite racist rhetoric, and really like these awful comments about Taylor Swift or whoever, like their bodies. And I just thought the cognitive dissonance that it takes to sit down and send a tweet saying, hashtag be kind, the media, should hang their heads in shame because of the way that they've treated this woman. And then 3 days earlier to have been using really racist, misogynistic language to tear apart Meghan Markle, who was a new mother at the time. It is beyond me. It is beyond me. And I think it's just, I don't know, I find it very, very strange. And I think that people, I suppose, really need to look at, like, are you treating other people the way you would want to be treated? Are you, even if they're celebrities, even if you think that they are rich and famous and lucky and that you're, whatever, like, they're still someone's daughter, they're still someone's friend, they're still someone's, like husband or partner or whatever. And it's like, how would you want, if that was your child, if that was your friend, like how would you want them to be treated? Would you want people leaving messages on their DMs telling them to kill themselves? Like, whenever I write a piece about recovery, there'll always be someone who'll say, yeah, you're so fat now, you looked way better when you were thinner. And I suppose, like, intellectually, like, I know that's not true. Like, intellectually, I know that, like, I'm healthier now, and that, I mean, not that there's anything wrong with being fat, but intellectually I know that I'm not fat. But like the eating disorder part of my brain kind of kicks in and goes, well, maybe this person is right. And you just think, my God, you have taken 5 minutes out of your day and you could jeopardize my recovery. Like, I could be dead in 6 months' time with this because you just felt like taking me down a peg or two. And there's something about that really frightens me, I think, because I suppose it's so beyond my comprehension of how we should behave as human beings or how we should treat one another. I don't know. Yeah. Sorry for that little rant there. Just
no, you're fine. I think there's probably a story to all those people who react like that they have their own story to tell. I don't know, was it Tina Fey or some other American comedian had a response very similar to yours, and she started to engage with the person. And they went down a route of him eventually apologizing and saying, look, my life is really crap right now, and I didn't mean to take it out on you, and you were just the first person that came across my path. I saw the tweet. And they ended up, I think she sent him to rehab or something. Anyway, she ended up helping him, and they became great friends. And so,
that won't be happening here, Siobhan. That
okay.
Won't be happening here. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, look, that's one little gem in a sea of awful pain that I was trying to show you there. But I know they don't all work out like that, unfortunately.
No, I don't think they do.
But so I just noticed we've gone way over time. But can I just?
Oh, sorry.
No, it's wonderful.
I always tend to go on and on and on. Like, especially in podcasts, I'm just like.
No, I really enjoyed it, but I did want to ask you your recommendations, because it's something that people always love to hear from other people. What you've watched on Netflix, or what podcast you've listened to during the pandemic that really inspired you or stayed with you, or you'd recommend?
Yes. Okay. Well, podcasts. I absolutely love a podcast called Keep It. It is these 3 Americans who sort of discuss pop culture and politics, and they're very funny. So I really enjoy that. And I love Not Without My Sister, which is an Irish podcast, and it's actually quite funny because it's about these 2 sisters. And I remember before I started listening thinking, like, that's quite a specific, like, it's just going to be about you and your family. But actually, the funny thing is, sometimes the more specific you are, the more universal it is. And so I found that really, really just laugh out loud funny and just incredibly relatable. Books, I think, I absolutely adored The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. It's just such a stunning book. Like, I loved her first book, and she just knocked it out of the park with this. And I think it's a perfect combination of a really clever conceit in that it's set in this fictional town where these Black Americans, light-skinned Black Americans, kind of keep marrying each other in the hopes that their children will become lighter and lighter skinned. And then these two twins who one of them, I suppose, disappears and marries a white man and passes for white. And this is kind of 1960s, 1950s, 1960s. And it's just, so it's I think the idea is really clever, the hook is really clever. It explores issues of race and colorism within the Black community in a really nuanced way. And then the writing is just beautiful, like line by line, it's just so beautiful. So I just cannot recommend that book highly enough.
So
And
just
then,
mention the name again, Louise.
oh sorry, it was The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett.
Okay.
And she's just an incredible writer. And then Netflix, oh, you know what I did love was Never Have I Ever. It's the Mindy Kaling show. And oh God, it's so good. It's about this young Indian American girl whose father dies, and she loses the use of her legs. I mean, which sounds really tragic, but it's honestly so funny. Like the whole thing is brilliant, and it actually deals with grief and trauma in an incredibly smart way that actually I think is, because it, you know, she gets quite, she's determined that this really hot guy in her class, that she's going to have sex with him, and this is all she can think about is having sex with this really hot guy. Like she's 15 and it's literally, you know, hormones are going wild and it's all she can think about. And it's just really funny and smart, but so moving. Like the last two episodes, I mean, I started watching it, I think it was at 3 p.m. and I was awake because I think, I'm not sure how many episodes were in it, and I was still awake at 3 a.m. going, I have to finish this. I can't not finish it.
I hope it had a happy ending with that plot.
Oh, God. Well, I don't know. I mean, it was a happy ending, but it was so moving. Like I was bawling because I think it was just the mother-daughter relationship and how fraught that had been since the father had died, and I absolutely adored it. So there, I'm getting very passionate here about my recommendations.
Okay. Well, I must check those out. They're a little bit unique as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us this week on the podcast, Louise. And best of luck with the new book.
Thank you so much, Siobhan.
It's out now after the silence.
Buy it. Go buy it.
And so to this week's newspaper. Our lead story is about a major new tourism campaign that Fáilte Ireland is about to launch to boost tourism in a sustainable way to the three most remote peninsulas in West Cork. More details of that inside. We also have some lovely photos of this year's Leaving Certs and a nice story about Fola Daly from Skibbereen, who is hoping to be a fifth generation GP after getting 8 H1s in her grades. We also have plenty of photos of this year's Leaving Certs dotted throughout the paper this week. We also have the case involving unsettling calls which were made last week to the family of murdered Ballinascarthy student Cameron Blair. And inside, with the courts getting busier once again, we have a number of West Cork court cases. One involves some distressing information on animal neglect, while another is a report of a man charged with an alleged sexual assault in the region. There is also some upsetting details of a victim impact statement from the daughter of a woman who was knocked down and killed while cycling on the N71 outside Skibbereen last year. But we also have a lovely story about Kinsale rallying around to help a family of triplets and 4 sets of twins who are currently at school in Union Hall. The people of Enniskeane and Ballineen want their toilets upgraded, we hear, and we also have a story of some families going into self-isolation as a result of a COVID case near their village. In features, we have a look inside the new Visitor Museum at Clonakilty Black Pudding, and a former guest on this podcast, Dr. Tara Shine, gives us her 10 easy tips to help save our planet. Our motoring page is a review of the new Corsa E, and there's a worrying report on Cork Airport on our business pages, as the airport has seen business collapse due to COVID. A beautiful split-level home in Scull is for sale for just under $500,000 in our property pages, and we also have some useful details on home improvement grants for sustainable options and the elderly, also in property. Farming covers the appointment of yet another Agriculture Minister, and 50 years of the Inchydoney lifeboat is our feature story on the cover of our community section this week. In her COVID diary, Emma Connolly is thrilled to finally get the frame for her swinging seat, and our health column talks about the pros and cons of being a night owl. We also have our usual local notes pages, packed with news from your local area, and a super sports section as always. So don't forget, if you can't get to the shops, you can subscribe online by going to thesouthernstarTV and clicking on the e-paper tab, or call the office on 028 2100 for a postal copy to be sent out to you. And now for this week's musical treat. The Southern Star Sessions is a popular segment which has been recorded at various intervals in recent years at the Southern Star studio. It has featured both visiting and local musicians, and each week we are asking our podcast hosts to pick their favourite sessions as we all enjoy a bit of nostalgia. So this week I have picked a great recording from 3 years ago. Paul Tiernan is no stranger to music and has been in the business for many years, but we really enjoyed this recording in the Star studio in April 2017 of a song called A Mother's Sin. For more from Paul, see paultiernan.com.
Now my love, you say you never want this, and how the hours and days and hours have worn you thin. And so we stand side by side, like fighters in a boxing ring, cut and scarred, bleeding hard, neither caring who should win. And if I could, as if I could, change what comes of this, devils dancing on wind and rain, ice melting in a glass of gin. Hard to forget our mother's sin. And so we sit and wait till late, and all is sleep, and summer's arms wrap warm around your tired body sleeps. And now my love, you say you never want this, and how the hours and days and hours have worn you thin. And so we stand side by side, like fighters in a boxing ring, cut and scarred, bleeding hard, neither caring who should win. And if I could, as if I could, change what comes of this, devils dancing on wind and rain, ice melting in a glass of gin.
listening to the Southern Star Coronavirus podcast. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our podcast, which is available now on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Acast, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.